WSDQ Dunlap, WEPG South Pittsburgh, The Copperhead, WSDT Saudi Daisy, Chattanooga.
The viewpoints expressed on LibertyWorks Radio Network are not necessarily those of the network, its affiliates, or sponsors. This is LibertyWorks Radio Network. Now live from coast to coast and around the globe. More real talk, the kind you want, on LibertyWorks Radio Network.
And good afternoon to all of you LibertyWorks Radio listeners out there. This happens to be Friday. This is a Friday in January 2020. It is also 5 o'clock Central Time, 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 o'clock at Pacific Time, and every Friday at this time, it's the Truth Attack Hour. And I'm your host. My name's Larry Becraft. I'm sitting here in my office in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm looking out the window right now. We're going to have some cold weather coming our way. We've had a mild winter thus far. But instead of being worried about the weather here in the middle of winter, you know, we haven't even got a month under our belts with winter. Although, you know, February's not far around the corner. 2 weeks from today will be the last day of January. And 2 weeks from tomorrow will be the 1st of February. And right after that, we have Groundhog Day. But let's overlook all these matters. I invite you to listen to this program today because we are going to be talking about some things that are going to be real important for people that consider themselves to be patriots to have this knowledge. And to go along with me on this journey today is my great co-host, a guy that is sitting out there. It's kind of like in the middle of California, and his name is Shaun O'Connor. All right, Shaun, you're sitting about in the middle of California.
Yeah, we're in California, and the weather is nice and calm and cool, and the forest fires quit burning since PG&E decided to take down their wires. It had nothing to do with global warming or anything else or climate change, but everything's grand here.
Hey, Shaun, let me bring this point up. I think you're having an issue here about you're saying something, and sometimes we've got a kind of a gap. Is it because you're calling in a particular type of phone?
Oh, yeah, actually I was trying a different system, so it's kind of cutting in and out?
Yes.
Okay, how's it now?
That's a lot better. That's a lot better. Great. Well, hey, Shaun, you know, one of the things that I think today I want to talk about the economic aspect of the income tax, you know, how it's related to the monetary system. But before we get there, you know, since for the last 3 months, we've been subjected to this hoax known as the impeachment process, being brought to us by the likes of, you know, this Schiff fella. I have a different name for him. Instead of, when I say his name, I don't use the F's at the end. I use T's at the end of his name. But Adam and Nancy and this fat little guy from New York, you know, they've been on TV a lot talking about the impeachment of the president, the bad things that he's done. And I kind of thought it would be great to start off our program to educate our listeners just a little bit about this impeachment process and to also expose our views to the audience. What do you think about that?
I think it's a grand idea.
Well, to get off on that topic, I think it's real important to start off with a review of the United States Constitution. This is a process that is talked about in the United States Constitution. Now, this is what I would suggest to our listeners who are wanting to know what the Constitution does say, even though I'm going to be talking about it this afternoon. If you want to see what it says, just get on the Internet and pull up a United States Constitution and read through it and see how little, really, the Constitution talks about impeachment. But one of the things you will find in the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution deals with the Congress of the United States. And Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5 says that the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. So there is nothing in the Constitution that talks about what the impeachment process is, other than it mentions that the House has the power of impeachment. Now, what does the Senate have to say? Well, the United States Constitution also creates the United States Senate in Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, and Article 1 of the Constitution. But in Article 3, Section 6 of the United States Constitution, it says the Senate shall have the sole power of impeachment. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. So now we know the Constitution says the sole power of bringing an impeachment charge, that's vested in the House. And the Senate, its duties in reference to impeachment is explained a little bit more fully. They have the sole power to try the impeachments, and when the president's involved in an impeachment, the Chief Justice shall provide, and also an impeachment of a public official requires that 2/3 of the members present must concur. Now, what else does the United States Constitution have to say about impeachment? Well, Article 2 of the United States Constitution deals with the president. And it says, in reference to impeachment, that just something real simple, that the president of the United States can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, there you have a real good summary. And if you want to see what it says in the United States Constitution, just go, look at it in the Constitution, and you can see what little really is expressed there and dictated there regarding what's involved in impeachment. Well, you can plainly see, since there have been, for everybody alive today, if you're older, we've been through the impending impeachment of Richard Nixon. We've certainly experienced the impeachment of Bill Clinton, and now we're going through the impeachment of President Trump. And since the Constitution says not a whole lot about the impeachment process, then these institutions like the House and the Senate, as well as the President, they've got to come up with they've got to make their own rules regarding how an impeachment shall proceed. Now that I've laid out the groundwork for what the Constitution has to say about impeachment, I want to get Shaun's comments about, what's the substance of all this? If the president can be impeached, and he can be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors, that's what the Constitution says, then, what's his view on what is going on right now? Is there any substance to it, or is this just a political, is a wool being pulled over our eyes by the Democrats?
Well, therein lies the rub. I've been hearing a lot about how this is a political process, but let's back up to what you were saying, Larry, about the Constitution, high crimes and misdemeanors. In other words, their expectation under the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, was that there was going to be some kind of crime committed by the president. And watching these proceedings, particularly from the House and the people that are conducting them, especially Pelosi, because I've got to tell you, I'm very biased. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not an independent. I'm somebody that believes in the Constitution. But watching Pelosi throughout the years, I thought, this gal's got her stuff together, and regardless of whether I agree with her or not, she's a pretty smart woman. She's pretty much failed for the last 4 or 5 or 6 months, as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, because she has sat here and politicized this thing so terribly it isn't even funny. Even though I understand everybody says it's a political trial, it's not completely political. I don't care what they tell you. They're talking about crimes that the president supposedly committed. And then we've got Schiff sitting there with his people in the House. And what do they bring forward for evidence that would never be admissible in a court of law? Hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay. It just doesn't flow. And the only witness that came up with any substance at all, and I forget his name right offhand, he said, well, go ahead.
Sondland, L-A-N-D, L-A-N-D, or something like that. He was, he contributed about $1 million to the Trump swearing-in activities.
Yeah,
so he was made an ambassador, and I think he was an ambassador to the European Union, or maybe to Iraq. But he's definitely he was one of the parties that was involved. Is he the guy that you're contending is the only one that has personal first-hand knowledge?
Well, and the reason I say that is because of the telephone call that I understand that he and Trump had. That he said, "Listen, this is what the president told me." Yeah. And he gave it to the Senate, and they didn't like it, and so what did they do? They brought in an aide that was sitting next to him, listening to a cell phone conversation that wasn't on a speaker that he said he could hear. You know what, I've tried that too, you can't hear it. But nevertheless, he based this aide based his testimony upon hearsay, based on what he thought he heard, which he could not have possibly heard. What I'm looking at here, this whole thing is dangerous as far as I'm concerned, because the Democrats, and it is the Democrats, look at the House. They're sitting here hating a president that they've hated from day one. I mean, you had Waters, the gal from California, said she was going to impeach him when he was walking down the stairs from Trump Tower. She's going to impeach him from them. And it's just been a game of what can we do to get this guy, whether you like the president or not, I don't care. You know what, I didn't like Obama for 8 years, but he was president of the United States, and we had to, accept that. That's just the way it was, and, we work the way we can work to try to change things. But with what's going on with Trump is just remarkable to me, and how this Democrat Party can do this. And like I say, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. I don't adhere to a lot of them because I have so many disagreements with all of them. It just blows me away how they can sit there and say, we're going to get you. We're going to get you before we even swear you in. There's something wrong with this. It's somewhere, regardless of how you want to identify with it, there is a problem here, and it's going to continue to manifest itself as this process goes on, and especially as presidents come and go. If they can do this now, they can do it tomorrow. And if they can do it to the president, they can do it to anybody.
Hey, Shaun, let me ask you this. What's your view? This is something that goes through my mind. It all starts off with the Bidens.
Oh, it does.
And, and then, as soon as this comes up, we see on the Internet, here we have it's authentic. It's real. It's Joe Biden sitting there and saying, hey, I'm over there in Ukraine, and I tell the president to get rid of the prosecutor that is investigating the company that Joe Biden's son's involved with.
Yeah.
And, that to me is real substance. Trump's got to be concerned, and he was concerned with the corruption of Biden.
I agree.
And then the Democrats want to come along, and they want to, all they're doing is attacking so that somebody never really sees the corruption that they're involved in.
I agree 100%, and I think it goes deeper, and I think this is why they went Biden, and I think once they get Biden, I'd be asking for Joe Biden, too, in the Senate. If we're going to do witnesses in the Senate, let's do Joe, let's do Hunter, let's do Schiff, and let's go a little bit deeper, because as I'm looking at everything in the stuff they put Trump through and the dossier, when Trump said investigation, I'm sitting here and I'd like you to look into what's going on that affected our country.
Yeah.
What I'm looking at is this. You know what? I think Trump's looking deeper than Biden. I think he wants to know what Biden's part was in this dossier and this Russian collusion garbage that's been going on for 2.5 years. I think that's what Trump meant. And if he did, and if that was his thought process, I'll tell you what, the amount of witnesses that he could call into the Senate is, I think, damn near never-ending. And I'd start with Hillary.
All right, hey, Shaun, let me stop you right there. And the reason I'm doing so is because I hear the music on in the background, and the music always tells us we got a break. Hey, folks, after this short break, we'll be back with 2 more segments. Stay tuned. And we are back. This is the Truth Attack Hour. Friday afternoons during the Truth Attack Hour this is a kind of a two-man team program. Shaun O'Connor, who sits out in the middle of California, and myself, Larry Becraft. We are the hosts on this program on Thursday afternoon, and our whole purpose is to try to educate you. And now that we have given you our comments about impeachment, now we want to get down to some brass tacks and teach our listeners about some things that we think are real important. Now, one of the things I want to tell our listeners about over the remainder of the program and get some comments from Shaun as we go along. I have posted over on my website two things that I consider are real important. It's something that the American people know little about. And let me tell you, I'm going to get to the conclusion, and after I tell you what the conclusion of what we're going to be talking about today is, I'm going to lay the foundation for how we get to this conclusion. Now, I've got this material posted on my website. Now, I've got two websites. One's LarryBecraft.org. Don't go there because that's just, information about how to get in touch with me. My website that has legal information, back in July of 1997, I posted it on my internet service provider, and it has been there ever since. So the way you will get to this website called the Dixieland Law Journal is just type that into an internet search engine. Don't use Google. Use some other search engine. Type in Becraft Briefs or Dixieland Law Journal, and that will carry you over to the front page of my website, this website that has legal information. Now, when you get there, there's not a whole lot on the front page. There's about 8 or 10 links to other pages where you will find relevant information. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today is found in two files off that page. Money and economics is something that's real important to me, and I've got a link off my front page that relates to money and economics, and it goes over to another page that has a lot of material regarding money and economics on it. That's one thing that I've got posted on my website that I want you to know about. And then the other, on the front page of the Dixieland Law Journal, there's a link to another page called Taxation. And over on this taxation page, you will find I've got PDFs of two articles. One is a speech by Beardsley Rumble, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York during World War II. Now, he and a guy by the name of Roy Blau, or Blau, I don't know how you pronounce his name, B-L-O-U-G-H. It could be pronounced either way. But I've got two, on this taxation page, I've got two documents, two PDFs, images of articles or speeches that they have written. Beardsley Rummel, the conclusion of his article, and when you look at it, take a look at the article. He gave a speech to a bunch of lawyers in New York. His speech was labeled "Taxes for Revenue are Obsolete." We're going to be talking about that today. Now, also on my website, besides this article from Beardsley Rummel that says "Taxes for Revenue are Obsolete," you will also find this article by Roy Blau. Now, who is Roy Blau? Well, he was at the time this article back in 1944 was written. And in this article is also the length of the PDF image I've got posted on my website is 11 pages long. But there was a speech he gave to the Tax Institute in New York on February the 7th, 1944. So it, too, this article was written by somebody from the Treasury Department during World War II. But the title of his article is "The Individual Income Tax is a Method of Inflation Control." Now, when you get down to the very end of this article, and it's a very easy read, you can download it on my website, here's what Roy Blau says at the very end of his article. "For these reasons, it can be safely concluded that the individual income tax is an appropriate and effective instrument of inflation control." Now, what I want our listeners to know about is, You know, we have a fiat monetary system in this country, and it cranks out a whole lot of credit.
Hey, Larry, tell them what you mean by fiat.
Well, fiat is just the government says this is money by fiat, by command. You know, it's by law. The government comes along and says that these pieces of paper are money. But for that command of law, people probably wouldn't use it. What's your view about what is a good acceptable definition of fiat money?
I think that's pretty accurate. There's one thing I would add to it, and this goes back to money has transcended or transgressed, as you know, Larry, through the centuries. But the way our country was familiar with it was that money would be denominated in gold and silver. And the gold and silver standard, particularly the gold standard, was removed way back in Nixon's era when I think it was the French president said, we want these dollars redeemed in gold. And the president said, you can't do that because we don't have a gold standard anymore. And so what I'm looking at fiat money is something that is valueless because it is backed by nothing except the government's word that it has value. And the way the government produces value for the money and says, you know what? We're going to accept that paper dollar for purposes of paying your taxes. That's like them saying, you know what, we're going to make Peach Pitts money, and we're going to accept Peach Pitts in payment of taxes. And that's what gives it its value from my perspective.
So true. Yeah, that's great, Shaun. That's a real good observation. Well, hey, let me just pick up from there. And, Shaun mentioned that, this is tied to the monetary system. But let's go back, how do we get our monetary system today? The United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution says no state shall make anything other than gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution authorizes Congress to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Now, if you go back into the old historical documents that relate to what was the intent of the framers when they drafted these provisions of the United States Constitution, those provisions were designed to ensure that we would use as money in this country gold and silver coin. The power to declare a legal tender back at the time of the Constitution was a power possessed by the states. And the U.S. Constitution says no state shall make anything other than gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. And that coin money that the states were going to be using was going to be coined by Congress. Now, here's what's happened. About the same time as the United States Constitution comes into effect, shortly thereafter, I think there might have been one or two banks in the country when the Constitution was ratified. There was one in Philadelphia, the Bank of North America. And there might have been another bank someplace else. But right after Congress got established in 1791, Congress comes along and passes the Coinage Act of 1792, but shortly thereafter they come along and they create the first Bank of the United States. And the first Bank of the United States was in business until 1812. And the second Bank of the United States was in effect from 1816 all the way up through Andrew Jackson had a battle over the end of the second Bank of the United States.
Oh, yeah, he did. Andrew Jackson reminds me of Trump. Or Trump reminds me of Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, and he has a picture of Andy Jackson in his office. We found that out when he got into office. Within a couple of days after Trump was in office, there were, articles there were shows on TV, where he was showing off Andrew Jackson's portrait that he has in his office. You remember that?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
But, here's what's happened since the United States Constitution went into effect. We've had this financial mechanism, I call it the financial power in this country, centered upon banking, that has grown up and has become incredibly powerful. And then there's a whole history behind all this. But in 1913, Congress comes along and creates the Federal Reserve Banks, pursuant to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. And then the Federal Reserve Banks get created, and they end up printing notes. And then those notes are eventually declared to be legal tender. And so what we've had in this country is this financial mechanism. The government's involved with it, but it's primarily private interests, the banks, and they have been successful in creating these semi-private, semi-public institutions known as the Federal Reserve Banks that issue these pieces of paper that we now claim to be legal tender.
See, Larry, let me interrupt for a minute. Wasn't 1913 about the time they ratified the 16th Amendment?
Golly, you are right. So true. Now, why did that come about?
Well, I think that the Federal Reserve is intertwined with the federal income tax, but I'm going to leave that to you.
Oh, okay. Well, you are absolutely correct. Now, we've had this financial mechanism in this country. Today, we don't use gold and silver as money. If we carry cash around in our wallets, it's going to be those green pieces of paper that are not redeemable anything. You can only use them to pay taxes, as Shaun noted. But most of our money that we use is just credit created by the banks. And so now we have, today under this system, we've got this situation. Let's say that, to use an example, let's say that the President of the United States needs some helicopters. And I can remember this when Obama was in office. They were wanting to get 2 helicopters for use by the President that were going to cost $10 billion. Okay, Shaun, can you imagine 2 helicopters costing $10 billion?
I can't imagine 10 helicopters costing $10 billion. No, I can't.
Unbelievable. But then again, it was $600 million. Obama paid $600 million. When Obamacare came online, hey, you can go over to this website. That website costs $600 million. But see, whether it's a website for Obamacare, whether it's some very expensive helicopters, Uncle Sam, Uncle Sam, as Beardsley Rumble says, exists independent of taxation. Why? Because it can print money. So Uncle Sam, if he wants to create a $600 million website, if he wanted to borrow it all, he would just give some bonds to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Federal Reserve Bank of New York would extend the face amount of the bonds, $600 million, and stick that into an account that the Federal Reserve maintains for the United States government. And then the United States government, all it has to do is spend all of that credit at the Federal Reserve Bank, and, it gets everything for extensions of credit. Everything the federal government can do, all the assets it has, all of the people that work for it, their fancy pensions, their retirement programs, all of the military equipment, the big ships, everything that the federal government gets today, just for credit. Tenders a check. Now, folks, the music's coming on in the background letting me know that our last message for a break is here. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stay tuned. And we are back. This is the final segment of this afternoon's edition of the Truth Attack Hour. And what I've been saying during the first part of this program when we're talking about, the tax system, the federal tax system at the federal level, is, the whole purpose is to control inflation. As Roy Bloss said, this is what he said. You can read this article that he wrote back in 1944, his speech that he gave in 1944, where he says, a fundamental objective of taxation, which largely determines the validity of the revenue objective, is the prevention and control of present and future inflation. The income tax is revised as bringing in the money, which is the most important factor of practicability for inflation control. Now, keep that in mind. Let me pick up where we before that break. The point I was making. Uncle Sam, let's say that, he's going to spend, he got from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, he got $600 million for the Obamacare website. And he gives that check, now that he's got those funds, which are bookkeeping entries, in the account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, he gives a $600 million check to whatever company did all that. Well, that gets deposited into probably a bank in New York. And that bank is then going to present that check to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. And all the Federal Reserve Bank in New York is going to do to pay that check is it's going to move the bookkeeping entries out of the Treasury Department's account at the Federal Reserve Bank. And it's going to shift that $600 million in bookkeeping entries over to the bank that presented it. All of these banks have accounts at the Federal Reserve. And that bank is just going to simply have its account also at the Federal Reserve increased. The $600 million is going to be taken out of the Treasury account. The Treasury account is going to be debited $600 million, and $600 million is going to be credited to the account of the bank that's presenting that check to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Now that's a very simple illustration. Now let's say that just one check wasn't used. Let's say that $600 million, Uncle Sam made checks for 100 different vendors and sent those 100 different checks all around the country. Well, basically the same process will happen all over again. Whoever receives those checks, they're going to deposit those checks into their banks, and those banks are going to have accounts at either a bank that has an account at the Federal Reserve Bank, or those banks are going to have actually an account at a Federal Reserve Bank. And the only thing that happens is the reserves of that bank to pay whatever that check is from the Treasury, the Federal Reserve Bank is just going to increase the deposits in the account of the bank at the Federal Reserve. And that's the way this whole system operates.
Well, how do they go about increasing the deposits, Larry?
Well, it's just the banks work the same way. This is the way a bank operates. When you go into a bank and get a loan, let's say you're going to buy a house for $100,000. The bank doesn't have that $100,000 in reserves. Let's say it has no reserves at all. Well, how in the world can this loan be made? Well, the bank just, when you go to the bank and borrow the money, all the bank is going to do is it's going to give you a check drawn on the bank itself. And so you're going to deposit that check into your checking account at the bank that's making the loan. And then when you take that $100,000 and let's say you're going to bust it up and pay 3 or 4 different people, $33,000 a piece or $25,000 a piece, the only thing that's going to happen is those people are going to take their checks, deposit them in their bank, and that bank is going to increase. When you deposit a check in your account, all that happens at a bank is the bank just increases by the numbers that it owes to you.
So it's a numbers game.
Yes, it's a numbers game. And then that bank will just simply have its account with some other bank, be it another bank or the Federal Reserve. The only thing that's going to happen is that it's going to be a numbers game, and that bank's going to be paid simply by increasing its reserves at either another bank or at the Federal Reserve. And so it's just all nothing but numbers.
Wow.
Yeah. So now here's an important lesson that was learned. This whole thing, you can trace modern banking back to John Law and what he did in France. Now, over on my website, you can read the story about John Law, because there's a page, as I've told you, devoted to money and banking, and you can go over to that economics, money, and banking page, and I've got a book you can download about John Law. It's about 70 pages long, a PDF image. I scanned and converted it to text, and I proofed it all. It's a real good little book that explains what happened with John Law. He created his fiat money system in France, and it rose and fell in the span of 3 or 4 years and created ruin. Well, the people have been interested in banking ever since. And so when the Bank of England was created, by 1800, the Bank of England had created a lot of money floating around. And there, as a result of that money floating around, you had a thing known as inflation. And the Brits came up with a solution for that. Tax it out of circulation. Now, the same thing happened with us during the Civil War. Both sides. The Civil War was financed not by any wealth that the Uncle Sam had. It was done by issuing green pieces of paper or pieces of paper. The South and the North issued pieces of paper in order to finance the war. And Uncle Sam by that time knew, hey, if you're gonna really use a whole lot of paper money, you better have a way to suck it out of circulation. Yeah. And that's what they did with the income tax of the Civil War. And then when we create the Federal Reserve Banks in 1913, it's known that they're going to be issuing green pieces of paper. So, we got to have this way of sucking those green pieces of paper out of circulation. So that's the reason why, before we had the federal income tax pursuant to the 16th Amendment and that legislation, but before all that, before we created the banks, we had the taxing mechanism in place. 16th Amendment was declared ratified in February 1913. In October 1913, we get the first Income Tax Act. And right before Christmas in 1913, we created the Federal Reserve Banks. So all of this is really an economic operation. Uncle Sam creates all this credit, and it taxes it out of circulation. Now, here's a good illustration. This is what I use to explain it to people. And after I explain this, I want to get Shaun's comment because we're approaching the end of the show, Shaun. Imagine an aquarium. Imagine that you get power by pumping water into an aquarium. Well, after a while, after you pump water into this aquarium, soon the water's just going to roll over the edges. Well, how are you going to keep the water level constant inside this aquarium? Well, you got to have an exhaust system. You got to suck out of the aquarium an amount equal to the water you're putting in at the top. Once you do that, then you can maintain a stable water level inside the aquarium. Now, here in this country, we have the water in this country is the currency in circulation, and we have this beast known as the federal government that is constantly issuing lots and lots and lots of this money. Let's call it water for our purposes of our illustration. There's got to be a way to suck it out of circulation, and that's the purpose of federal taxation at the federal level. It's to maintain and control inflation. And I say that, why do I say that? Because Beardsley Rumble said it. Because Roy Blau said it. And Roy Blau's statement to this effect appeared in a book, a big book, that said the same blooming thing. Articles by a whole bunch of other people from the same conference they had in 1944, and they all said the same blooming thing. I just picked Roy Blau because he's a Treasury official. And as we know, you can rely upon what the government says.
So they say.
Yeah. So is that right, Shaun? Can you rely upon the word of the government?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. The Supreme Court says I can do that over and over again, and every time we do it, you know what, I'm not sure we don't get in trouble.
Well, hey, Shaun, we're almost to the end. What are we going to do to, here we're going to be going through the next couple of weeks this spectacle of the impeachment, and, the American people need to follow that along, but there's also a need for patriotism to be rekindled in this country. What do we do to create that rekindling of patriotism?
What we're going to have to do is what we've been doing for many years, and that is offer the people suggestions on how to become active in your government. Remember, folks, you're the government. Every time I hear somebody talk about our government, we're not talking about our government. We're the government. We the people. What we're talking about are elected officials that are bastardizing the Constitution. We have to take it back. And you know what? I think Larry and I have a lot of good ideas how to go about getting the elected officials' attention.
Yes. And do you think we're going to be talking about that over the course of this program over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I certainly expect so.
Okay. Well, hey, what do you think would be, we've got some people on here. I would like for our listeners to tell others to listen in. This program, at least in the Eastern Time Zone, people are at home by this time. And here in the Central Time Zone, a lot of people are home. They have the ability to listen to this program. Out on the West Coast, it might be a little bit more difficult, but you can still make an attempt to listen to the program. So,
Yep.
Shaun, are we going to be talking about patriotic themes and topics over the next couple of years?
Certainly, and I want people to understand something too, Larry, at the same time. People can make change. When the Prohibition came in, the people changed it because they wanted to obey the law, so the elected officials had no choice but to change it. LGBT people, like them or not, you agree with them or not, it doesn't matter. They got it changed. Things can change in this country when it becomes a grassroots movement and the people say, we've had enough.
And have we had enough?
Oh, we have had enough. And I think everybody in this country has. I just think they lack for the knowledge to be able to do something about it, and I hope we can provide that.
Hey, Shaun, we're almost at the end of the program. I think our listeners need to have some contact information for you.
Okay, well, you can get to me at Shaun O'Connor. That's SHAWN OCONNOR, no E's, .org. ShaunO'Connor.org. It takes you to my website with all contact information and various other things that are on my website. That's the easiest way to get to me. Telephone numbers, websites, so on and so forth, and emails are provided on that website. That's ShaunO'Connor.org.
And would it be fair to say, you and I met, I hate to say all this, this indicates how we're old, but it was decades ago, and ever since I first met you, all these decades, you have been involved in full time in this battle to restore patriotic government. Is there anything wrong with that statement?
No, that's absolutely correct. I had a real nice, comfortable job in corporate America, and then when I became educated, self-educated in what was going on in this government, I thought, wait a minute, this is my government, not their government, and we have to stop this. We have to go back to constitutional standards. And
you were involved in the creation of the free enterprise that for many years, decades,
yes,
was deeply involved in the money issue, the tax issue fight.
Yeah, 23 years of Free Enterprise Society, yes, I was.
And now you're keeping on going, and we're going to be using this show to try to accomplish some favorable things. Is that right?
Oh, yes, and we can do it, and you know what? I know why we can, because people are listening, and they're going to accomplish it, too. Well, this is a grassroots movement. It will get done. It may take a little bit of time, but remember, we the people. That's how the Constitution starts. We the people.
Well, hey, Shaun, I hate to interrupt right now because it happens to be the end of the program, and I know that because the music's in the background. Hey, folks, we'll be back. Shaun, what's your parting words?
Oh, thank you, everybody, for listening. Tell your neighbors and friends about us and tell them, tune in. There's a lot of great information.